Welcome to Southpod, the first and foremost podcast created to tell the true story of tech innovation in the American South. Southpod is hosted by John Yarian and Stanfield Gray and produced by Dig South Tech Media. Dig South Tech Media is the South's tech hub, the place where leading global brands connect with the most scalable startups. Visit us at digsouth.com and follow us on social media at DigSouth. This episode of Southpod was recorded as a part of the Dig South 2020 Virtual Tech Summit. It features keynote speakers Jordan Berry and Tony Berry of Interloop. Now let's dig into Southpod with Jordan Berry and Tony Berry.
Great. I'm Tony Berry. I'm CEO at Interloop. And Jordan, you want to say hello real quick, Jordan?
Yeah, hey, everybody.
And what we're going to do is we're going to talk today about, as Stanfield mentioned, the 6 steps to becoming data-driven. And first, I just wanted to ask everybody a quick question. And this is the agenda we're going to cover, is why it's important to become data-driven, why it can sometimes be challenging, the 6-step game plan for success, and then Jordan will review a customer story. But we wanted to start with a question. And it's probably obvious that none of us would try and drive our car forward down the road only using our rearview mirror. But yet, if you think about it, many businesses do exactly this. We manage our businesses off a spreadsheet or a report or stale data that's looking in the past, that rearview mirror, and yet we're trying to make forward-looking decisions. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is a way of not using just your rearview mirror, but really looking forward and making great business decisions. And this is this concept of becoming data-driven. Now, candidly, becoming data-driven is hard, especially in today's world where the volume of data is large and it's expanding and accelerating. And this data isn't in one place. It's usually scattered and siloed across all the departments. And if any of you tried to integrate this with kind of common integration tools, it can be very slow and it's often error prone. And because of that, businesses are struggling. In fact, 80% of businesses say the time spent to become data-driven is actually on getting the data ready, finding it, cleaning it, and organizing it. And therefore, 70% of that really valuable asset in data goes unused for analytics and reporting. 70% of that data is not used. And what this causes on the organization is it affects all levels. Executives can't make those critical decisions in times of change. Managers don't have the information they need to really coach and guide their teams. And the analysts who are trying to get this information, again, don't spend time analyzing, they spend time getting the data pulled together, often with significant delay. And so you have to ask yourself, this is so hard, is it really worth doing? Well, the answer is yes. Leveraging data helps drive growth. And McKinsey did a study recently where they found that data-driven organizations, those who make business decisions based on the insights coming from their data, are 23 times more likely to acquire customers. They're 6 times as likely to retain those customers, and therefore they're 19 times as likely to be profitable versus their competitors who are basically making business decisions off instinct or past experience. So it's definitely worth the effort. And the key attributes of a company that are data-driven really fall into these 5 categories. First, data is treated as an asset. So you really look at it just like you would anything else in the organization that you consider an asset or being valuable. And this idea of getting near real-time insights is really important. The organizations typically try and set up their systems to support that. Insights, and this is key, are provided for all levels within the organization. If you look at really good data-driven companies, everyone from throughout the organization is really driving off of these data decisions. And it's got to be treated as a critical functional area. In some cases today, we're seeing this thing called the chief data officer who's really responsible for this. And these insights are surfaced at the right time and in one place so that you can make better decisions. You're not going to chase that data and it's kind of brought to you. And what's really interesting in data-driven companies is the decisions they make off that data become new data that provides the insights for future insights. So we believe becoming data-driven is a 6-step process. And I'll go over these real quickly, and then Jordan's going to actually go through an example for everybody. But becoming data-driven requires first that you understand the business need. And what this means is you really sit back and you focus on what questions are you trying to answer and what do we need to become more informed. And then you have to go through the step of aligning your people, your process, and your technologies. It's very interesting. Becoming data-driven is not just a technology challenge. It's making sure that your people understand how to make database decisions, that your processes support this. And George's going to show you a great example of measuring a life cycle. You've got to make sure you understand that life cycle process. And then technology is an enabler. And so a lot of times it's kind of thinking you have to jump to that last step, and you really have to make sure you spend time on people and process for the technology to actually work. Number 3 is usually a fun exercise. It's where does the data live? And we find often you're going to find, many sources of the data that you need access to. And don't forget, it's sometimes in spreadsheets, it's sometimes in email, maybe in an old archive system. And so you want to really map out where the data that supports the information on that process is located. Then the fun part, this is where technology starts to come in. So once you understand people, process, technology, and you understand where the data lives, now you can start to relate it and blend it together. And what blending means, and again, Jordan's going to show an example, is the data in these systems may not be formatted consistently. So a customer in your web lead system may not be identified the same way as it is in your CRM tool and the same way it is in your ERP. So you've got to blend that data together and make sure that, again, you're aligning that to the questions that you're trying to answer. And then finally, you're typically going to bubble this up in some sort of visual or analysis set that's going to start to drive the insights for you. And that's step 5. And then step 6 is now take action based upon what those insights inform you. And now, again, that action is going to become new data, and you're going to check whether the action was effective or not. So that's the 6 steps as you work through them. And it's really making sure you spend the time to walk through each of those. And if you do it really effectively, the things that will start to happen in data-driven companies is they can confidently answer questions like this. Am I hiring the right people at the right time to meet my customers' needs? Are my teams consistently meeting the deadlines that matter? Is my forecast accurate for this month, this quarter, this year? And can you start to predict what those future revenue streams are going to be? Oftentimes looking at the payments for your customers that are at risk can be extremely insightful, especially in times like today, where the business rules have changed because of some of the things that are occurring with the pandemic. A really interesting one is the one in the middle there too, is are my largest customers my most profitable? That's not always the case. Sometimes we assume it, but if you become data-driven, and if it's not your largest customers, what customer segment is it? And why are they more profitable? And can I go find more like that? Often it's helping with products too, is what products should we introduce to meet unmet customer demand? This is a concept of loss review, and it's really interesting. Again, Jordan's going to talk about this with one of our clients. By looking at why you are losing a situation, it may identify a product gap, a pricing gap, but you need to measure that so that you can have the right informed insights on that. Customer onboarding is really critical right now. Am I onboarding my customers effectively, and how can it be improved? And then the big one that we hear a lot right now is, hey, am I getting the ROI on my marketing channel, and where should I be allocating my spending? So those are just a few examples of what a data-driven company can do and answer that confidently. So I'm going to let Jordan do now is he's going to walk through a case study of a customer that is well on the journey to becoming data-driven, and then we'll answer any questions at the end.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so Tony spent some time going through the 6 steps. And so what I want to do in the second half of our presentation here is walk through a customer. I'll give you some background on who they are, kind of what they were struggling with, and then how they applied the 6 steps to their business and where they are today. So the customer I'm going to highlight, they're going to remain nameless, but at the time you can imagine them as a marketing services company. So they're a fairly large company. They've been around for over a decade. They're about a $50 million business top line. They're about 80 employees and growing. What's unique about them is they didn't buy into a particular tech stack. They didn't go Microsoft or Salesforce. They decided to pick the best tool for each department and each system, which we tend to find is very common today, that a lot of companies have a lot of different systems from different vendors. And really the challenge they were struggling with was, how do we get timely and accurate reporting? So every time they had a quarterly review or a board meeting, it was a chaotic scramble to pull together the data. There were analysts that were digging into Excel and pulling together reports. And half the time the numbers wouldn't match. So one analyst would come up with one number, another analyst would come up with another. And so we've been working with them for almost 24 months now, so about 2 years. And when they started, it was really a charismatic CEO that drove the company. Almost all the decisions went through him. He was the bottleneck. And he used his gut to make the decisions. But as they started to grow, they realized that wasn't going to scale. That wasn't going to create the type of growth that they needed. And so I'm going to highlight what's called the lead to cash process. I'll talk through that on the next slide. So really what they understand, and we call this lead to cash, is basically from very early on when you're talking to a lead in your marketing system, through your sales process and then into fulfillment, how do they understand, the whole customer life cycle? So how do they go from interacting with the company on the website to then engaging, doing a project, and then ultimately, hopefully coming back, year after year, doing more projects, doing more work with the company. And so just some of the challenges, these are some of the questions that Tony highlighted that they couldn't confidently answer, was, what does my sales pipeline look like? And do I have enough revenue in the pipe to hit the goals for our growth? They were really struggling with forecast accuracy. They would sometimes predict a number that was way off each quarter. And so obviously their board members and investors were struggling to understand why this was happening. The other thing was the bottlenecks. Is they do a lot of creative services type work. So they were trying to figure out, is the bottleneck in the fulfillment? Is it in the sales? Is it in marketing? How do we understand, why things are getting stuck in the full customer life cycle? And then especially they were trying to understand, are we spending, time with the right customers? They candidly were chasing kind of any business, and they didn't really have a good clear picture of who their key accounts were and who they should be targeting to drive the growth that they needed. So out of this, they engaged us to help them become data-driven. And really their main goals were around these 5 things. So how do I more accurately forecast? How do I understand my pipeline? How do I not only achieve sales efficiency, but also effectiveness within my sales team? They also wanted to increase their velocity. Sometimes their sales cycle would be 12 to 24 months. How could they cut this down so they could get contracts signed in 6 months instead of 12? And then overall, how do we understand our customer life cycle? Are our customers happy? Are they, satisfied with the services we're providing? And can we increase the lifetime value of each customer? So the first step really in the 6-step game plan is aligning your people, process, and technology. And this is the step, candidly, that everyone wants to skip. They want to go right to the technology. They want to download some software and just magically solve the problem. But the challenge, especially as you get into a decent sized organization, is that you have to align all aspects of the process. So they need to figure out everything from what is our business strategy, where are we going as a company, to who are the key people. They, for instance, actually had a fairly virtual team even before COVID. So they had to figure out, how do you align people when you're not all sitting in the same conference room? What are our key processes? They delivered a great product, but they didn't understand all the inputs and outputs that were leading to that fulfillment. And then finally, they started off, very gut instinct, a lot of spreadsheets. They started to invest in different departmental systems. And so now they needed to understand, where's our data and what technology do we have in house? How do we harness that data to value and to drive growth? Then came the fun part of figuring out, where does their data live? And so this is just an example. And I imagine most people in the audience, if you look at this, is probably somewhat of a mirror of your own company. Is you have different systems that you've invested in. You may have something like a marketing system like MailChimp or Pardot. You may have a CRM tool like Salesforce. In their case, they had a quoting tool that was called Vendava, which they did all their proposals and quoting and pricing. You may have a accounting or ERP system. In their case, even at a $50 million business, they were still running out of QuickBooks. And then you may have some other kind of non-structured sources. So you may have, PDFs and content in S3 that is just kind of a storage space for some of your sales collateral. And in their case, they had a homegrown project management system with a SQL backend. And as I mentioned before, a lot of Excel reports. So a lot of rich data, but obviously spread across these different systems, fairly siloed. And while some of these tools like Salesforce provide basic reporting, it isn't enough to get that holistic view of what was happening in their organization. So once they understood where their data lived, we helped them understand how they could connect and blend that data so they could get that 10,000 foot view. So the first thing that we helped them with was, how do you connect things like marketing campaigns to your sales initiatives? And then even further, how do you connect those sales opportunities to actual revenue? So one of the key questions they were struggling with was, we know how much we sold a deal for, the contract, but have we actually invoiced the full amount? So if the contract was worth $50,000, they may have only invoiced 10 at any given point in time. And there's still, $40,000 that was left out there. And you multiply that across the 100 projects, they've got these big swings in revenue that come in different times. And how do they hire for that? How do they figure out what talent they need? These were just some of the daily struggles that they were having. So once they were able to connect this, even across systems, so they didn't have to move the data, put it into a data warehouse, but they were able to, using some modern technology, connect and blend these systems, they could start to get the real-time insights that they needed. And so finally, once all the hard work, the heavy lifting, they connected the tooling, they got the data together, they were able to put on top of their data some very graphical analytics type tools. So in this case, they were a Microsoft company and they used Power BI, but could have used other tools like Tableau or Mode or Looker. And what they were able to do was in near real time, so within a couple minutes, they could see their actual invoice to date. They could see their sales pipeline. And probably more importantly is if they identified anything unique, if they found a customer that hadn't paid an invoice in over 90 days, they didn't have to go back into the QuickBooks system or a different system. They could, right from the dashboard, take action. They could send a reminder email. They could export the report, so they send it up the chain and see if they could get the invoices paid by the customer. And really, this became the hub of the business. Every day, their executive team would log in, look at this, and this was really what was driving their business forward. So it was a long journey, but they went, over 24 months. They went step by step through the 6-step process, and really went from driving blind to now having almost a self-driving car that could sense what was out there and give them the insights they needed to move forward and grow their business. So if you're like them and if you're looking to become more data-driven, my advice would be start today. It's a journey and it's going to take time, but the sooner you start, the sooner you're going to reap the benefits and gain those insights that you need.
Excellent.
Then Tony, I don't know if you want to just touch on this.
From here. So a lot of times we get asked, well, gosh, how do I get started on this? And so we've put together an ebook that you can download from here that walks through the 6-step game plan in a little bit more detail and will help with that. So that's a free copy that we make available to everybody.